Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Dmitry Sitnikov. Thanks for joining today. Thanks for having me. I'm a mobile developer at this studio since 2011, and my team is working with Kotlin since it became first-class citizen by Google. And after we started the migration from Java to Kotlin, we quickly realized that some of the features, some of the powerful features of the languages, if misused, can actually harm our code rather than improve it. So I'm going to share our experience in some of the learnings and the guidelines that we have to mitigate that. First, quick recap. What are the extension functions? Extension functions are the functions that you declare kind of outside of the class, and you can then apply them to the class instance, even though you may not own the source code of it. And the scope functions are the special type of functions that do nothing except for calling your own lambda in the scope of the object, so hence the name scope functions. And most of them happens to be the extension functions. So before we begin with the problem statement, I encourage everyone to join the link that you see on the slide. I'll ask a couple of questions, so we'll play a little game there, and we'll see how that goes, a little code review game. So what's the problem with scope and extension functions? First of all, with scope functions, you have to keep a little bit more context in mind than you normally have to. You need to think about the receiver of your lambda. You need to think about the receiver of the methods that you call within the lambda. You need to think about the last statement. It may or may not be the result of the scope function. So that's a lot of things to memorize, and that often cause some minor issues. Another thing that's been shown in a previous speech was the context switch. When you have a chain of operators, that often happens with Rx, for example, you kind of have this it in every single line. It looks like a single variable, but it is actually something different in every line. And you have to mentally switch this context over and over again when you read the chain, the long chain of these calls. With extension functions, we have way more chains like that, even apart from Rx Java. But the most important issue, I would say, is the possibility of subtle errors. As Ash mentioned, extension functions are kind of static, so they depend on your code, not on the actual type of the object that you send there. So you change something slightly on the left, you change the type, and then suddenly the same function or the function that looks the same will produce a different result because they may have a different receiver's nullability or it may have a name clash with the system function somewhere, and well, it will end up in a bug that sometimes is not even called by the compiler. And mastering scope functions is not an easy task. I found this example in the internet. So if you Google how to use scope functions, you may stumble upon this blog post, and it says, here is an example how to improve your code. It was 3 lines in the function. It became 1 line. But this 1 line, I would say, not necessarily easier to read. First of all, it's hard to say what that's going to return, file on the left or result of the it make gears on the right. Here, that's the correct example. It returns file on the left. What's not quite correct here, if you look closer to that, this part is not even required at all. You can remove that and it's going to be exactly the same behavior. But with a chain of the scope function calls, it's hard to tell whether you need it or not. And to kind of demonstrate you that sometimes it's hard to deal with the scope functions, we're going to play a little game. If you remember Ash answers, that would help you. So can you name in the chat that you just joined which 2 functions here return the scope object itself and not the result of the lambda? And I'm watching the responses here. I'm going to give folks a couple seconds, but I'm going to share the answers anyway, and feel free to type your answers even if you see them on the slides. I see a couple, and the correct answer is apply and also. You can keep typing your answers if you already made a decision. Just going to see the results. And then the second question is like, which functions here take lambda with the receiver? So this function will not have this it parameter. I'm going to give you a hint. That's 2 of them. Waiting for the results. A couple. And the correct answer is with an apply, take lambda with the receiver. So as you can see in the chat, that's quite easy to get that wrong, especially when you're doing the code review and then have the IDE support. And let's not forget to actually have 5 of them. And now I'm going to switch over to IDE to demonstrate to you in real time how the bugs can creep into your code, even with the simplest extension functions. So here we have a common one. It's called for each, and we do for each loop over this range from 1 to 5. We print every variable, and then if it's equal to 2, we then return. And then print that. So again, you can type your answers in the chat. What do you think that's going to print? It's going to be 1, 2 done, or 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 done. Basically, have 5 options here. And I'm going to run the test. Not going to wait for too long, so you can feed in time. But you can type your answers anyway. I'm really curious. So drum roll. Wait a second. And that's going to compile, print, and it prints 1, 2. It doesn't print done. Maybe surprising for someone. The reason for that is this return. It's called non-local return. And why is that allowed? I'm going to show you. So if I switch this for each to my implementation, it will not allow me to do a non-local return. And my implementation has exactly the same code as the system one, as you may see, but mine is not in line. So that demonstrates how inline versus non-inline functions are slightly different, not just in terms of the performance, but also in terms of the behavior. And that's another thing that you need to keep in mind when you write and review them. But let's do a more sophisticated example. We're going to write the parallel implementation, no coroutine, sorry, just to keep it simple. We're going to do that, and we're going to run this version instead of the proper one. I'm going to also sleep a little bit here so we can see the results. What do you think that's going to print? Is that going to be different from the previous one or the same? And that's actually going to be exactly the same. What is not correct here is the error that I made. And you will see that if I do current thread printing here, and in your line, you'll notice that it actually runs on the main thread. And the problem that I use the IDE auto suggestion, but this run is just a scope function. So it can execute on scope of any object, including the thread. So it basically does nothing with the thread. Thread is thrown away. And the correct code would look like that. And now it doesn't allow me to pass the lambda here because I need to make it cross line. You can learn about that later. And now it finally doesn't allow me to do non-local return. So I have to fix that with a proper one, according to auto suggestion. And now, so now can you guess what that's going to print in this case? Will that stop at this E2 or not? And by the way, now the multi-threading is correct. And as you can see, it prints all 5 numbers. After the previous example, it may look like it would return, but now it doesn't really matter because that's the last statement of the lambda. It does nothing. If we remove that, as you can see, we'll have exactly the same result. So hopefully by now I convince you that sometimes you can actually scale up in the simple lambda function, and you may miss some subtle errors during the code review. So how do we deal with that? First of all, I do recommend everyone to check Kotlin's official documentation for the scope functions. Don't look at the code examples, they just demonstrate how to use them. There is a section below that shows when to use them. I have to slightly disagree with the definition for run. I think it's kind of vague, and when you do object configuration and compute the result at the same time, it's often a little bit too much for a single lambda. So I have a slightly different set of mnemonics for them. So here we go, the mnemonics for scope functions. If I want my code to let it work with a nullable value, I use let. And when I have a constructor call, I want to apply the configuration, then I use apply. And when I want to return an object and also do something with it, then I use also. And if I want to do multiple similar things with an object, then I use with. Like similar things maybe like fetching a bunch of fields, like a bunch of fields of the object. That would be a good example. And I don't really have a good use case for run. Maybe there is haven't seen one yet. And in addition to that, there are a couple of rules that can make you code better with extension scope functions. They're not hard rules, but they're good to follow. First of all, if you have a scope function that takes lambda and returns the result, keep it one line. Then you don't have to guess what's the purpose of the lambda, whether to apply some configuration to the object or transform it. Let is a good example. Keep it one line. And when you have multi-line lambda that works with an object, like often happens with or with apply, restrict it to a single object. If you try to call methods of the enclosing code, or if you try to call methods of some code outside of your class, then you break the scope of the scope function and make the code review way harder. What also helps our team is establishing the patterns, like typical ones, question mark with let is a pattern pretty much. And as soon as you see it, you immediately recognize the pattern and it makes code review way easier for you. And there are a bunch of other good patterns there. And the main piece of advice probably is to just not use scope functions to make the code shorter. Use them to make the code better, to make it more idiomatic, not just shorter. And switching to extension functions in general, unfortunately, there is no official guideline by Kotlin team, as far as I know, like when or when not to use them. But a bunch of great examples, and a good example would be KTX. KTX adds extension functions that look like a normal functions. Like write the extension functions like if you have access to the source code of the class. So you would write the same function anyway if you have access to the source code. And don't try to use the receiver of the extension function as a parameter. One of the bad examples I found in our code looked like string.connect hash map, which didn't really make sense until you substitute the parameter string and then you realize this is a URL that should have been a parameter, not a receiver of the extension function. And then another thing, again, as Ash mentioned, like those functions are kind of like static ones. And when you write them, don't forget to nest them under additional level of packaging or an object, because Kotlin will not use the file name if you declare extension function on top level in a package declaration, and you will end up with imports that's really hard to read and hard to discover. And the main piece of advice here would probably be not to use the same name as the system functions. Try to avoid the string run and other short names, because you will end up with name clashes. Use something unique. What's dangerous about name clashes, as I showed before, something like .run doesn't even require an import. So if you have your own function with the same name and you write it, the IDE will not even suggest you to import one of two versions that have the name clash. It will automatically use the system one that's available in the global scope and doesn't require any import at all. So that's a typical source of the bug from my experience. And say that I'm not advocating in any way for not using them. We have a bunch of great examples. We do use scope extension functions a lot in our code. Just going to share a couple that I find particularly interesting. We improved our parameterized test greatly. Instead of writing list of array of for parameterized test, we have a couple of infix extension functions that do that. And now the test is crystal clear and easy to read. There is lesser known kind of scope function called use. That's basically Java's try with resources, but for Kotlin, it does the same. It closes any closable for you, and it does it safely. So it will even wrap the close call with try catch. So a really nice example of the function, and we'll write our own versions if there is no official one available similar to that. And I guess I have one more minute. So just gonna share one more real life example. That's the example of our code. I copy pasted it exactly as this. So we have with that takes some loan fee details. So yeah, we do with loans, and it returns a pair of strings. So then it assigns this pair to some views. That's how you see it in IDE, but and you can see that first and second relate to that pair of strings. But in code review mode, it will look like that. You'll not have this hint anymore from Android Studio or IntelliJ IDEA. So we can try to improve it with let. Now we have this helpers, it dot first, it dot second. So now we can see that first and second are not the methods of the enclosing object. They actually belong to the pair, but you cannot see that this is a pair again. So we can improve even that. Now we can clearly see that we have a pair of values and we gave them the names. So they made the code better. But now compare that with another Kotlin function, just destructuring, without any scope function here. The code is actually shorter, and I would argue that it's not less readable than the best of options with scope functions here. So think twice whether you need one or not. Apply the mnemonics, and hopefully you'll get a bit better is reading and understanding scope functions and extension functions related code. I think that's it. And we have some time for questions and answers.
All right, Dmitry, thanks so much. Also giving you your audible feedback today. Oh, it's still going. It's still going. I'm not even pushing. No, I really appreciate you being here to work us through that. Right now, in fact, what I'm surprising, unless I'm reading this wrong, Uli, we have no questions, which means your explanation was so detailed, fantastic. In fact, I actually found the mnemonic device, that slide that you created with the mnemonic device, particularly useful. But it's definitely, you've hit on two important topics. In fact, I was in the Kotlin Slack group today looking, and I think just on scope extensions, there's around 5,000 entries with questions, extension functions about 15,000. So it's definitely a highly relevant topic. I think it's something a lot of people are talking about. It looks like we do have one question here that's popping up that's been a couple times. So what I'm going to do is switch over so that we have so that Uli can share his screen with us so that you can see the questions that are popping up here. Okay. So Uli, you should be able to share your screen at this point. Okay, Dmitry, do you see the question? Feel free to read them out loud and fire away.
Yep, I see them, and also have to mention I have a chat for answers. Somebody is trying to ask the question for me. That's not the right place. I'm sorry. There is another link for questions from you, and I'm gonna read the first one. So when should we use the inline function? I would say until you need it. Again, don't use it. The inline functions are great when you need to control the outer flow, like shown in this example for each. It's often required to return from the end closing code. So far, you can only do the returns, but Kotlin team is working on supporting some statements like break and continue in the future. So hopefully we'll see more of that, and we'll have more use for inline functions. So if you need features like that, or if the performance is actually a great concern, a good example would probably be like nullability checks or custom contracts you may need to apply. Check the variables, check the inputs of the functions. That's going to be a great use for inline. So you will reduce an overhead of them. And we have one more. So I said avoid run, but is there ever a case to use it? Well, I think that actually is a case. So far as probably the only way in Kotlin to run the block of code when the expression is needed and we have a statement, and that's probably the use case. But again, I found from the personal experience that in most of the cases like that, when you can use run, you can also use just a normal function, except for this example with a statement. is nesting scope functions that practice? I don't think so. I think Kotlin introduced that for a reason, and I do not use them often, but sometimes I do. Like usually, that's a place where I need the lambda, but I want to make it more explicit and give it a name. So then sometimes the code of the lambda may be a little bit obscure, but when you give it a name, it became way better. So I would declare that function as a nested one. But maybe I didn't realize the question. So the nested scope function within the scope function. Then I think, yes, usually that's a better example because you are introducing multiple scopes within each other. And if you think about the normal functions, the whole purpose of them is to reduce the scope and make the code analysis easier. And you're doing the opposite when you nest scope functions within each other. There may be some exceptions to that, but usually it is that practice. I think we can use run in construction let question mark and then question mark run. What do you think? It's better that you read the questions. It's like actually shows the standard Kotlin idiom. Let doing something on a nullable and then return something else if the result is null. I think this construction is a little bit overloaded. More idiomatic way would be if you have just an expression without a run on the right side. So run here probably does nothing. If you need more than 2 statements in a run, that's a little bit too much. If you can have it a single statement, then you would not need run on the right side of it. And one more, what do you think about using the let function to check nullability? So I think that's a great pattern. And the key word here is a pattern. When it just emerged, I was kind of against it because it was new for the team, and many people were switching from Java. So anything new for them was a huge blocker in terms of readability. Now it's widely used, so I think more people are familiar with that pattern. So now it's totally fine to use that. But again, compare that to if something not equals to null, it's not actually shorter in any way. So the only difference is that how familiar your team with such pattern. If you have a bunch of Java engineers, I would probably keep using if. If you have a lot of experienced Kotlin engineers, feel free to use let whatever you can. And one more. Can we use apply when I don't want a return, but do some block of operations, or is there any other alternative? I don't fully understand that one. So I think the way I understand that, probably you asking about apply versus also. In both cases, you can run a bunch of operations on your scope object and then return the object itself, or maybe you don't want to return it. And because they're so interchangeable, I have this mnemonic. So I only use apply when I actually want to apply the configuration. And I use also when it has nothing to deal with the object. So when I don't want to modify it. And that's how I pick between the two. And that's pretty much two alternatives. And obviously, if you need to return the result, then you cannot use apply. And also, you have to use the other scope functions that return the result of your lambda.
All right, we've got two more minutes for questions, Dmitry. So let's see what we can get through.
Cool. One more from Eugen. Is there any good example of using different scope functions, GitHub or somewhere else? Will your code from webinar will be shared? It will be shared. I have it in my GitHub. I published that tonight. I will also share the slides. And there are a couple of good articles in Medium. You just have to pick the right one. Or maybe I'll try to pick a couple of good ones. The one that I shared wasn't the best, but there are a couple good articles in Medium. Sure, yes. Which do you think is better? Question mark column object question mark dot let. It's something, or object non equals to null. I think I answered that one. So I don't think there is a difference in terms of functionality here. It all depends on your team. If you have a Java team, use something that's more familiar for your Java developers. If you have a Kotlin team, then question mark of that is totally acceptable.
All right, Dmitry, we've got I hate to cut you off there, but we're just trying to keep this thing right on time. Really appreciate you being with us here today. Actually, fantastic presentation. I learned a tremendous amount watching you today. So thank you so much for being here with us. We hope to have you back as well again.